Today, we have a returning guest, Debbie Kerr-Henry. She was on episode number 91 titled Discover the Healing Power of Personal Stories, or Empowerment Through Embodiment. And I got a lot of positive feedback on that episode, so I'm happy to have Debbie return. She is a contemplative writer who enjoys reading, traveling off the beaten path, and devoting time to Toastmasters, an international public speaking organization. She values fitness, mostly by muscling up through CrossFit. Her biggest challenge, largest joy, deepest love, and most profound teacher has been found in her role as mother. With an ambivert personality, she can be quite social while also needing solitude. It's not unusual for her to retreat to places off the grid to read, write, and reset. Debbie lives on the east coast of Florida in a slow-paced, artsy boat-billy community. Her roots, however, began in a Midwest farming community and extended into Southern California and Central Texas, where her two sons were born. Back in the day, Debbie worked her way through college to earn a bachelor's degree in English journalism. You can learn more about Debbie at momentusliving.com, and I will put that link in the show notes. So thank you so much for being here again today, Debbie.
Well, thanks for asking me back. It's good to be back.
So today, Debbie and I wanted to talk about overwhelm. We have had so many deep conversations about so many different subjects. And we think a lot about how we can improve our own health and wellness. And then, of course, thinking about how we can support other women on their health and wellness journey as well. And earlier this year, Debbie and I had a conversation about why so many women seem overwhelmed or on the verge of overwhelm. We're just like, if one more thing happens, it's just going to push them over the edge. And I often hear women say that they feel really disconnected from their social circles, their community, and their sense of self. And they also feel really unseen and unappreciated by the people closest to them in their life. And meanwhile, we're so busy as women focusing on our roles of being a mother or a spouse, an employee, a daughter, a friend, and we just start to lose touch with who we really are. And we end up feeling lost. But something that Debbie and I have talked about is how when we feel lost, that journey can serve as a catalyst for us finding ourselves, which I think we would both say that that's what happened for us. So we started thinking about who are we as women without all of these roles and responsibilities? And how do we change our relationship with those roles and responsibilities so we don't feel so defined by them or like they are running our lives or pushing us into so much overwhelm that we just want to run away from our life? And it's hard because it feels like it's really common for people to live in this state of overwhelm and taking on so much responsibility. So Debbie and I really just started talking about how this happened and what we could do to help women change this pattern. And the next thing you know, we were exploring places to hold a retreat and putting down a deposit on a retreat venue so that we could explore all of this with other women. And part of the retreat planning process included surveying women to better understand their priorities and see if they were like ours, and they were. So let's talk a little bit about overwhelm. I'd love to hear, Debbie, how you've experienced overwhelm and if you've ever felt like you wanted to run away.
I'm laughing because, maybe every day I think, oh, I just want to run away. But I also know too that running away is not a good answer because I can't keep running, right? So we all have to face our responsibilities and our realities. So I am known probably more to retreat than to run. I've learned that retreating is a good way for me to reset, to get off that grid a little bit and reset, be quiet and still so that I'm able to hear. But that was really emphasized a lot this year for me, Heather, when I was doing some one-on-one business coaching with you. And I found myself saying more often than I cared to that I just feel overwhelmed. And that word kept coming up. And we started to explore that. It was like, why do I feel overwhelmed? And for me, I think that's when I really started exploring that word. And then you and I started talking about it. And here we are today, wanting to do a retreat and explore it a little bit more because it seems like a theme for many of us, we women.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when we started talking about doing this episode, I started writing down how often the word overwhelm came up for me. And then looking at what word I could replace overwhelm with so that, because just even the state of me using the word overwhelm, it's like it comes out of my mouth once and then I hear myself saying it over and over throughout the day. So I started noticing that the more I said it, the more overwhelmed I felt. I was like conditioning myself to be more overwhelmed and feel like less in control of what I was happening, even though I work for myself. I make my own schedule. I had to stop and look at that and think, how can I be so overwhelmed? Like maybe this is something I'm just used to saying. So I started writing it down and looking at all the things that I was using the word overwhelmed to describe. And I started realizing that using a different word there would be so much more helpful because using the word overwhelm was not helping me at all. It was just contributing to the problem. But going back to thinking about what like feeling, what you do when you want to feel like you want to run away. I used to feel that way a lot before I moved to Florida. I don't feel that way as much anymore, but I was thinking when you were talking about retreating, every day when I walk, that feels like a little mini retreat to me.
Yes, I understand that. I do a lot of that as well. Just even going to the gym or having a place in my home that is quiet and peaceful, really creating a life within each one of my days where I can retreat when I need to. But if I can add too, just, you were talking about the word overwhelm, and I can so relate to that too, Heather. That's what was happening to me. I was saying it all the time. And so I was convincing myself I'm overwhelmed. And being a writer, I really want to understand what words mean because we often use words and they're often defined differently by people. And so I looked up overwhelmed. I thought, okay, I keep saying I'm overwhelmed. What does that even mean? And what I discovered was overwhelm is this feeling where we think like it's like a ship being just sinking and we have no way of saving our ship. It's full of holes and it's going down. That is overwhelm. And so I was thinking, okay, my ship is not sinking. It's not the bottom of the ocean right now. So what is it that I'm feeling if it's not overwhelmed? And the root part of that word is whelm. And that's more of a situation where, yeah, things aren't going so well. Maybe the boat has a few holes in it, but you very much can do something about that. And so that's where I landed, where I try to take my mind. It's like, okay, there are some things I can do in this situation. There are some things that maybe I can even get off my plate so they don't weigh me down as much. And that's when I started moving away from that word overwhelm, just even understanding what it meant and using a different word like what you said was very helpful.
Yeah, I remember you being very intentional about the word change. And for me, prioritizing has been a big part of that awareness as well, like you mentioned, like sometimes overwhelm happens because I'm not taking the time to prioritize everything, no matter how small, has the same amount of importance in my mind. So I have to stop
Mhm.
and take the time to really decide how important each thing is and then work my way down the list, starting with the most important thing. And then I always feel relieved from that. But I'm wondering if you think about how so many people end up this way, like, and especially as women, how we end up being so defined by our roles.
Yeah, I've thought about this and I don't think it happened overnight. I think it's been a process. Like we women have had to literally fight for our rights as women, which has been a good thing. But I also think we're getting to this place where we need to take a step back too and ask ourselves, so what does that mean to us right now in 2024, 2025? Does having equal rights mean that we have to prove ourselves to everybody and take on every role and responsibility because we think we have to prove ourselves for some reason? And so I think we have to ask ourselves some really smart questions and to figure out how to step out of the overwhelm in our own lives because it's going to look different for everybody. We all have different core values and different goals. We're in different seasons. We all have different histories. So taking a step back and just asking ourselves, do I have to be in all these roles and responsibilities? Who am I trying? Why am I trying to prove something to the world? And I don't know, that's something I think we're still trying to sort through and figure out. It's been a long process. We've gone from not having many rights to getting our rights and having to fight hard for them. And now are we at this place where we can figure out a better balance in all of it? And also to not put ourselves against men, them versus us, but how can we come together and collaboratively make this world a better place?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking while you were talking about how I felt this sense of responsibility to earn money, like, the equivalent of earning like a man. And also at the same time, while having the career that was required for me to do that, performing all the duties of a stay at home mom as well. And I felt like stuck in this role of this expectation for me to be everything to everybody. But the problem was there, I never really stopped to think about what was most important to me, what was fulfilling to me. I just was like being overwhelmed by all the waves and just treading water and never getting an opportunity to stop and really look at what my values were, setting boundaries, what was important to me in my life until it was all the holes were in the ship and it was sinking and I had to do it or I was going down with the ship.
Right. Right. We're now in this crisis, correct?
Yes.
I think learning how to get out of the overwhelm is really takes a lot of self-awareness and exploring our core values and living out of and through those core values because that helps us make better decisions. And also knowing this balance too between not going to the other extreme now and it's all about us, where it's a selfish self-awareness, but it's a self-care that's important because we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anybody else well, right?
Yeah. I really never understood that. And I didn't even really think about what I needed, or I was always just thinking about what everybody else needed, looking outside of me for approval and acceptance. I think the first time that I had any glimmer of realizing how important it was for things to come from inside of me was a few years into my career as a controller. Somebody that I was working with, it took me like 2 years to gain this person's trust. And I remember during that time, because the company had been through a lot of transition and a lot of things had happened before I got there. But during that time, I realized I can't rely on him to tell me that he thinks I'm doing a good job. I have to decide every day that I think I'm doing a good job. But here I was probably in my late 30s, early 40s at that point, the first time that that
Mhm.
occurred to me. So it was the beginning of this realization of how important that everything that I'm looking for comes from inside of me first.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's really coming to that place, but not going to this either or. Like I always like to say, there's something to be said about embracing and in our world, like self care and giving to others. It's all important, but it has to start with us, right? But not at the expense of others.
Yeah. And not at the expense of ourselves. I think that a lot of times when we talk about as parents dealing with a child struggling with substance use, there's that it has to be one or the other and not that everybody can thrive. Okay, we had to stop recording for a second because there was some noise in the background. We're picking back up with talking about overwhelm. And Debbie talked about defining overwhelm earlier, and I had looked it up as well. And one of the things that came up in my research is that overwhelm is not an emotion. We describe it as if it's an emotion, but it's actually a condition that comes from experiencing several emotions or stressors at once. So it's like a mix of anxiety, stress, fear, sadness, all happening at the same time. And if you want to hear more about the difference between worry, stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, you can go to episode number 64, where I break those down and talk about how they're all different yet disconnected. So when you find yourself saying, or we find ourselves saying that we feel overwhelmed, if we look deeper into that and say, okay, I can't use the word overwhelm here to describe this. What word would I use instead? That's where I came to the idea where I was talking earlier about when I was looking for that substitute word, it helped me to get more to the root of what was going on with me, that not prioritizing was the biggest thing that came up. And so as I was searching for that other word to describe it, it was more like, oh, I just have so many things that I need to get done. I don't know when I'm going to get them all done. And that's when I had to prioritize and decide what I was going to do each day. So it feels like when you're feeling overwhelmed, like you can't handle what's going to happen. And when I was reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, all I have to do is ask myself one question. Can I handle this? And of course, yes, I can handle anything. I've handled things I couldn't have even imagined handling. And so I've started asking myself that question each time the word overwhelm comes in my mind. Can I handle this? And it's yes every time. And I immediately feel better.
Yeah. And, there's a quote that I love to remind myself of that helps me. And it says, do not let good become enemy of best. Because we live in a culture in the United States where we have so many choices and there's just so much going on all the time. Our lives are not very simplified. And so we have to be good at making choices to keep our schedules simple, to keep our stuff minimalized. Otherwise, everything just keeps piling up. Because I think some of it's just our culture, and we have to get really good at managing all of that. And for me, I ask myself, is this just good or is it best? And to determine if it's best, I go back to my core values. Does this align with my core values?
Mhm. Yeah. And we've both brought up how our core values help us a couple of times. And so I want to talk about a way that Debbie and I both decide what's important to us, what we're going to work on to improve our overall quality of life. And one of those things is the 8 dimensions of wellness. And that comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, SAMHSA. And the 8 dimensions of wellness are physical, emotional or mental, spiritual, environmental, intellectual, financial, occupational, and social. And that provides us with a framework, a way to look at and separate areas of our lives so that it's kind of like breaking down that overwhelm, where we look at the separate emotions that we're feeling. And here we're looking at the separate parts of our life to see which ones need more care and attention. So we made this personal assessment using the 8 dimensions of wellness to see how to help people see which dimension, where the low hanging fruit is, where they could get some quick wins, which area needs a little bit of deeper work. And then we're also incorporating boundaries and core values into that. You want to share a little bit about that, Debbie?
Sure. Yeah. So when I think about wellness and all those dimensions, it helps me to put wellness on this spectrum, to go from sick on one end to fit on the other end. And wellness is somewhere in between all of that, from those two extremes. And so I'll just pull out one of those dimensions, Heather, that you mentioned. Let's focus on environmental wellness. That was one that I really didn't think much about. I didn't ignore it, that's for sure, but I didn't put a lot of intentional thought into it either. Because when I hear environmental, I think of like global warming, and that's so big. I do my share to help with that. Like, I recycle, I do what I can as an individual, but environmental wellness really is about putting that piece of it in our own homes. So what is our home environment like? And what can we do in our home environment that will help all of us who live in our homes have a healthier lifestyle? It's kind of like when you plant a seed and the environment is not conducive for growth, it's not going to grow. And that's like our home environment. It has to be conducive for growth.
Yeah, I love that. I used to always say, as long as my house is clean, I can handle anything.
That should be on a t-shirt, Heather. I love that.
But I used to be messy. I didn't think about my environmental wellness. But I feel so much better when things are clean and organized and there's not clutter. But taking that a step further, like a lot of times when I'm working with somebody, especially somebody whose kid's struggling with substance use, and there's all this chaos in life, do you have a place in your home that is like a sanctuary to you, even if it's just a corner somewhere that you can go and feel peaceful when you're there and pleasant? Maybe have some oils or a candle burning, or just to create an environment that feels good to you and has things in it that you like to look at. Even sitting here at my desk, there are things that really make me happy to look at everywhere I look. I spend a lot of time at this desk. I set this office area up intentionally to support me while I'm working every day. And it's the same thing with my bedroom. Like, all of these areas to me now are a sanctuary. I didn't even really think about that much before, but especially when things started getting bad with Helena, the house I lived in at the time, I had this perfect room that was like way away from, like, you had to walk through another room to even get to it. So I could be just totally away from everybody. And I started spending a lot of time in there and it became my sanctuary, that environmental wellness. It's really overlooked.
Well, I have to say, we women can get very creative with our spaces. Like my office is in the laundry room. I've totally transformed to that. That's my space.
Yeah, I mean, mine, I use my RV as my office. And there's this lady I follow on Instagram. She calls it her laundry office.
I love that.
But it is just about the setup and making our environment work for us. And then bringing the core values into that, thinking about how that can help you decide what matters most to you and give you guidance if you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed or lost as you're trying to sort through these 8 dimensions of wellness.
Yeah, I think if you can just identify when you are starting to feel overwhelmed, I think that in and of itself is huge because some people, we can get into these places and we feel so overwhelmed and we're not even realizing what's going on. So these 8 dimensions of wellness help keep us in this healthier place. So when things are going in difficult places, we can identify them before it gets to that overwhelm and our boat is sinking and there's nothing we can do about it. So it keeps us out of the crises more.
Yeah. At the end of last year, I did this kind of review of the year and where my life was. And I identified that my life was very out of balance, that for the last several years, probably part of coping for everything I'd gone through with Helena, losing her, I was just throwing myself into work. That was what I could do. And that became my whole life. So this year, I wanted my core value to be balance. My life did not reflect that, but choosing that word of balance as a core value that I could work toward, it's been a reminder all year. And we're in August now, and I feel like I'm really finally getting there. But
Yay.
yes, because I identified that as a core value, I've been able to keep going back to it. How am I doing on this balance? So it can also be something that we want to work toward. Our life doesn't necessarily reflect it when we choose it.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up that point because we never arrive. And if we think we do, if we arrive to perfection, then we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment after disappointment. And I know when we've talked, Heather, we've really, both you and I agree that it's not about becoming experts at things. It's really just about stepping more into our lives and continuing to grow and expand and transform. SAMHSA, you brought them up earlier, they actually define recovery as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. It doesn't say anything about perfection and finally arriving. And I kind of see this as a great definition for wellness, just changing a few things and saying a lifelong process through which individuals improve their health, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Maybe for me, it's like, and I guess I bring this up because, we've talked about this retreat and I've been to different retreats or workshops, et cetera, where I feel like we're all talking about all of our accomplishments and titles and that we have to do that to somehow prove ourselves that we're worthy of even being there. But I know for you and me, it's more about just showing up in whatever is going on in our lives and continuing to try and not quitting and having this mentality of always trying to learn and not give up and striving for our best.
Yeah, that when you just said that about it not being perfection, I was thinking about after Helena passed away, I was just in this place of feeling like I have worked so hard on my life and worked so hard to support myself and support my daughter and make all of these changes, hoping for this outcome of my daughter's recovery, which she was working toward. And I've been working toward my own recovery. But I had to come to be okay with that all of this work did not look glamorous on the outside. Because when I first started doing this work, my intent was that it was going to, like, my whole life was just going to be shiny and sparkly and bright, and people are going to look at me and know that I've done all of this work. And then I realized that is just not how it is for everybody. I can be working just as hard or harder than somebody else. And there is no perfection in this, how it looks on the outside, but how my life feels every single day. And the peace that I have, even going through the hardest things that I've gone through, you can't put a price on that. And knowing that, being okay with my life not being perfect, being okay no matter what is happening in my life, and having these dimensions of wellness and values to reconnect to. And we haven't even brought up boundaries yet, but then even thinking about balance. And I've had to set boundaries with myself on my time in order to work towards that core value of balance, and to help me really identify that that is what's most important to me. And I started making a lot more progress on this. I think it was in June. I was like swimming with my friends and we were talking about life. And suddenly it just came in my mind. There are 3 things that you want to accomplish. And until you accomplish those 3 things, then it's a no if it doesn't help you accomplish those 3 things. And that has helped me to really streamline my focus on balance and what I want to accomplish in my life next, what's going to fulfill me. So, but I could have never got there if I didn't have all these pieces helping me narrow down on what I need to feel fulfilled every day.
Right. It's definitely a process, isn't it? Kind of all this reminds me too, if you don't mind, something that I wrote in my book, Momentous Living. It ties into all of this as we try and figure out who we are as women. And I wrote, as a woman, it has been challenging to find my rhythm, my balance, my peaceful place as I considered my roles in society and in my home, and probably even more so within myself. Just like I suspect it can be difficult for men to be strong and masculine, yet also gentle and emotionally aware. After college, my plan had been to work hard, live well, and impact society in a positive way. I had envisioned a fulfilling career, a model marriage, compliant kids, and a happily ever after. It was a good plan, really, really good. So good that I patted myself on my back for it. Good job, Debbie. You have a really good plan. But what I underestimated in my life plan was life itself and its flawed realities that require regrouping to better understand or maybe even find the person who once planned the plan. No, life was not factored into my carefully drawn out blueprint. And as a result, my plan imploded. And I wrote that 10 years ago when I was facing 50. And now I'm facing another milestone. And it's really kind of interesting to look back on how my life was at that time. And now as I move into another new decade, what I've learned through all of that. And so I'm very excited to be here and be talking about things like overwhelm and how you get through it, and how we women can be more resilient and empowered, stronger and true. Like we call that acronym RESTED. Refueled and rested is what we like to say, you and I.
Yeah. I identified with that passage you just read so much when I was reading your book. I think I probably stopped and read it like 5 more times because it was so true. And it described what I just shared about how I felt like when we're making all these plans, life has different plans for us sometimes. And we've got to have these things that we do that help us roll with whatever life throws our way. So that's what we had in mind when we came up with our. I feel like I don't even remember it being an idea. I just feel like next thing you know, we're doing this retreat. I don't
Right.
remember from the idea to actually happening. It just was happening. I think it was meant to be.
I think we started out saying, let's retreat. We've got a retreat. And then it's like, let's do it with other women, you know? And then we sent that survey out and got a lot of response from the survey, just comparing notes. And it was just validation that there's so many of us that could benefit from a retreat that helps us to refuel and be more rested.
Yeah. One funny story before we end. So we didn't end up reserving this place, but one of the places that we went to see if it would be a good fit for our retreat, we were sitting outside early in the morning, looking at this big open field. And the next thing you know, we see a bobcat come walking across the field like he owns the place. And a hawk or an eagle or not an eagle, a hawk or a falcon, something like that, attacked the bobcat. And it did like a cartwheel to escape getting attacked. And we both just looked at each other like, did we just see that? Did that really just happen?
I know, it was so crazy. It's like, we'll never see that again, probably.
No.
But yeah, it's like we just saw a bobcat get attacked and do a flip in the air. It was so wild, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like nothing had even happened. And that bobcat exemplified, like, here's life coming in as the hawk, and the bobcat
Right.
is us just trying to live life and
That's
just
right.
keep going no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Like, had
so
no idea what was about to happen to him.
yeah, yeah. So we've had a lot of fun planning this, and it's really important to us to create an experience where we get together and go through these things, but also have a good time. So we're having this retreat in Florida, which, the Sunshine State. We're doing it in the middle of winter, February of 2025, which to me is perfect weather here. And we picked a place that's off the grid, away from all of the typical Florida hustle and bustle. And we really want you to be able to focus on yourself. So meals are included. We're having a sound bath, of course. There's like no way I could do a retreat without a sound bath. And a sunrise cruise on the St. Johns River, some yoga, some interactive, educational, and small group sessions so that you can leave feeling refueled and rested. That acronym that Debby mentioned: resilient, empowered, stronger, and true. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm just so excited about this. Like, I've spent a lot of time on the St. Johns River, and I just want to add this because I think, especially if you're from out of state, the St. Johns River is like an old Florida experience. It's not like a beach experience or a Disney experience. It's so very different. And if you have not experienced that part of Florida, you are so missing out. But it's just a place that is immersed in nature. And that is what Heather and I wanted. We wanted all of us to just be in nature and to be able to hear ourselves think, right? And just refuel and be more rested.
Yeah. So there will be a link in the show notes where you can go to our We Women Wellness website and learn more. Thank you for being here today, Debby.
Thank you for having me again. Fun discussion.